My next guest also needs no introduction. He's a physician geneticist who's discovered genes associated with a number of diseases and led the Human Genome Project, as I just mentioned. Welcome, Dr. Francis Clemons, the director of the National Institutes of Health. Great to see you, Dr. Clemons. We've had some great conversations in the past, but, this is much bigger, right? Let me just start out asking you a question. I mean, you've been at NIH for a long time. You're going to continue to be at NIH. What have we learned in science, in the partnerships we need? What have we learned about ourselves that we better never forget again?
That's a great question, Stephen. Thanks for the chance to join you. I think the things that have been done this year in terms of truly novel, nimble, innovative approaches to speeding up the scientific approach to COVID-19 have taught us some lessons that we must not forget going forward. Things that people said, well, you just can't do that. We've been doing those things. I'll give you two examples. One is in the area of therapeutics. If you looked at where we were back in March in terms of therapeutics for COVID-19, it was frankly a scattershot. There were hundreds of different compounds that people thought might be helpful. There was no coordination. A lot of the trials were being designed in a way that were too small and not well enough powered. You weren't really going to learn whether these things worked or not. We brought together, ultimately, 20 pharmaceutical companies, the NIH, the FDA, the CDC, the Veterans Administration, DOD, BARDA, and basically convened them in something called ACTIVE, which is Accelerating COVID-19 Therapeutic Interventions and Vaccines. And that group basically dropped everything, didn't worry about who would get the credit, designed the master protocols, set up a means to do prioritization of which therapeutics ought to get into trials first, figured out how to coordinate all these clinical trial networks that needed to be brought to bear on this, and made progress in a few months that normally would have taken years. So let nobody tell you that we can't get sectors together and tackle a problem when we really need to, and agree that time is of the essence. That was a remarkable experience and continues to this day. This active partnership has many people meeting right now from the various working groups. Paul Stoffels, who's the chief scientist of Johnson & Johnson, and I are the co-chairs of the executive committee. And it has been an amazing experience of everybody on deck doing everything they know how to do. That's one example. Another is the area of diagnostics, where we knew we needed more diagnostic technologies. The Congress gave NIH $1.5 billion back in April and said, do something. And so we turned NIH into a venture capital organization. We set up a Shark Tank. We invited small businesses to bring their ideas forward. They got checked out in a very intense way. And the ones that looked promising moved to the next step in an innovation funnel. And now, right now, today, something like 600,000 tests are being done today based upon those new technologies that otherwise would still be back in some lab getting tested out. And most of those are point of care, and some of them are home tests. And that is the way in which I think we're going to be able to move the testing agenda forward much more than we would have been able to achieve if everything had to be done in big box labs. And we will remember how to do this in the future when there's something that needs that kind of approach, where you want to go fast, you want to bring experts together, you're willing to take risks, and you want to have results.
Just because I want to dig into it later, what is the second initiative called?
RADx, Rapid Acceleration of Diagnostics, RADX.
Okay, cool. Well, I will go there. Let me ask you another question. Maybe this will be out of left field. How do I put it? Sometimes I don't know what I'm going to ask until I get it out there. But, the state of international cooperation in science, you and I know technology is a borderless challenge. And if there was one thing that, in the last few years, was part of our scene. It was America first, America this, and, this notion. But when you kind of look at the smart people around the world, companies around the world, nations struggling with this right now, I guess, what is the state? Are we healthy today in terms of our international connections? Talking to places like CEPI or COVAX that is trying to vaccinate so many people in developing countries and around the world. What is America's engagement with that apparatus that's global?
Well, on a scientific level, that engagement never went away, even though there were suggestions that at the highest level, the U.S. was stepping away from the global scene. Scientist to scientist, that didn't happen. We continued to have ongoing conversations with others at WHO in Geneva, and certainly in terms of things like vaccine distribution with COVAX, we were always in the middle of those conversations, even if not formally so. And having had myself a chance to be part of such things as the formation of CEPI through the World Economic Forum, I'm personally very engaged to this. And, Americans, I think, probably understand, especially now, we cannot afford to only look inward in the time of a global pandemic. I mean, here we have this emerging variant in South Africa that we're concerned might be a threat to whether our vaccines work. If you needed one more example of why we have to think of COVID-19 as a global issue, there you go. So I'm glad that we are now back in the place where we can say officially that we are part of the world community and we're going to play our role there as best we can. And personally, I think that's not just a good idea scientifically, it's a moral responsibility.
Francis, if science has saved us and science is back, and you've just kind of described, we reacted to this pandemic that hit and we got it right, we got it well. If you had more resources to not be reactive, to be strategic, you had more financing and funding to do more, would we be solving more of these big problems hitting us?
Well, absolutely. It's very clear that we are at a remarkable time scientifically in terms of the potential of making discoveries and applying them for clinical benefit in a way that most people who've been around a while, like me, almost have to pinch ourselves and say, wow, look at what we can do now that I didn't think would happen in my lifetime. But all that takes resources, and we're still leaving a lot of great science on the table in the current circumstance where the resources to support what we're trying to do is well short of the potential of making things happen. It still troubles me greatly that a lot of young scientists who are trying to get their labs going are facing a pretty steep uphill battle to find that funding at a time where only about 1 out of every 5 proposals to NIH can get funded. And I know there's more than that that are meritorious and that we really ought to be supporting.
I know that you're a guitar player. You tweeted out this song that you wrote to sing to your team, those NIH heroes who had worked on the vaccine. Is there even a line you can share with us?
Well, that was a rewrite of a song called Thanksgiving Eve, written by a folk singer back in the 60s and 70s. And it was at a town meeting right before Thanksgiving. And it was basically saying we've got to focus on what we can do and remember what we're really all about. And the last line, which I guess I rewrote for the song, it wasn't part of the original, was what we have to do. We have to love the darkness away. And I think science in its best form is a way of loving your neighbor, reaching out and helping those who are suffering, coming up with answers that can reduce that likelihood of terrible outcomes. So yeah, we're still there. We're still loving the darkness away because we're not done with the darkness yet for COVID-19.
Look, I know we got to go, but really one last quick thing. You led the Human Genome Project, which was such a platform leap in what our options were. Is there another thing like the Human Genome Project that's classified that you can't tell everybody, but you want to share with us right now about the next big platform that we're going to hit?
Well, it's not classified because then I couldn't tell you. But there's, the Genome Project opened the door to the possibility of being large-scale, team-oriented, open data access efforts in biology. And it was pretty controversial at the beginning about whether that was a good idea or not. Now nobody's doubting it. I'll just give you one example. Working on how we can take what we've learned about genetics for those thousands of genetic diseases where we know precisely what the misspelling in the genome is, and building on the gene editing apparatus of CRISPR and Cas to figure out how to do this at scale for all of those diseases by delivering a gene editor to the right tissue and doing the find and replace in the genome instruction book to fix what's going wrong there, starting with sickle cell disease, where we're already getting along with this and applying it to lots of others. Now, that is a big, bold idea. It takes all hands on deck of smart people who know how to do those things.
Well, Dr. Francis Clemons, Director of the National Institutes of Health, who makes science fun. We always have a good time and have fun. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really, really grateful.
Glad to be with you, Steve. Have a great one.